how were you? How did the process go in terms of designing the character? Like, obviously, you've had other melee characters before. What was sort of the philosophy behind the design of this particular new class?
Yeah, there's a so classes are the most expensive thing we make. Nothing takes more time, energy, and resources than making a class. Like, that's and no matter what you're doing in the game, you're always playing that class that you're playing. So keeping those guys robust, keeping them feeling really good and visceral. You know, I'm always surprised at how well the combat team can make clicking the left mouse button feel over the top. And all that other stuff that comes out on the screen and the way your animation looks and feels. They did a really good job on that. And that's been the case for a long time in all the classes. But when we try to add something new to a game as complex as Diablo III, the basic questions are the class has to have some sort of distinct combat role. It can't just be a visual change on an existing class or largely fit the exact same thing that you would do if you're going to form a party of 4 people. And it has to have some strong fantasy. And this is a little bit different, but always incredibly related, of course, to what the tactical role is. What are we missing from the fantasy landscape? Where's the fantasy fulfillment? You're playing this game because you want to escape from normal life and play something grand, play some sort of basically superhero in medieval armor. And how can the Crusader fill that role? In addition, there's some other more minor considerations that we still have to take into account. We want to always be expanding the universe of Sanctuary. We want to make the game feel bigger, to make the world feel richer, and that's where the Crusader came from. So we try to have archetypal classes, and I would say an archetype done poorly is a stereotype, an archetype done well is an archetype. And the Crusader was, you know, the first idea was knight in shining armor, but in order to give it that twist, to make it more Sanctuary, that sort of dark, grim, gothic thing, he became a knight in battle-scarred armor, like somebody who's been fighting his entire life since his apprenticeship started. He's essentially been in combat in permanent state of war, and so that's not something where you can have shiny armor and pennants and be courting fair ladies. This is grim, you know. This is much more the Game of Thrones type take on fantasy than it is some sort of Excalibur Arthurian legend. So that's sort of where he comes from. We tie him into the Paladin, a very popular class from Diablo II. And we gave him a handful of the same skills that those guys trade, but we wanted to make sure that he stood out and expanded the universe. So mostly the Crusaders are new skills. Tactically, they fulfill a role where it is a melee class, but we had the Barbarian, who's a big bruiser already, and we have the Monk, who's super fast. So in between, we made sort of a battle mage in a way that we call it mid-range melee, where the Crusader's got heavy armor, the shield that's part of his weapon. He's constantly slamming, you know, enemies and bashing them and throwing it at them. But at the same time, he's got a number of ranged abilities. So I think we did actually find an interesting role. And it was hard because the 5 classes we had in the basic Diablo III game really covered the field pretty well. So it took a while to dial in exactly how we could take that fantasy and make him different and fit right into that group. And so far, I mean, the beta was awesome for us. We got so much feedback. We made a ludicrous amount of changes, and the Crusader seems like he's in a really strong place. The class was very popular on the beta, and it wasn't just people poking around and trying him for a few levels. There was a lot of level 70 Crusaders out there, and people did that the hard way, and they knew that this character was not one that's getting saved. It was just for beta, and it totally gets wiped when you start. We're really happy that people spent that time, and they seem to enjoy it. So should be fun seeing what sort of splash he makes in the grand pool of classes and achievements out there.
No one can stop death.